It's my pleasure to introduce one of the top coaches in our industry, Matt Jansen. Hello.
What's up? How are you?
Fine, thank you. And you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Just in case anyone has been living under the rock, could you shortly introduce yourself, please?
Sure. So I started coaching in 2009, 2010. I started coaching full time in 2013, and that's when I really my wife and I had a conversation, and I broke off and did my own thing full time in 2013. In 2015, I met Justin Compton, and I started training with him. I was not coaching him. I was training with him. And he definitely helped bring me up into, where I'm at today in terms of, highlighting me at an early age. And then through Justin, that's how I met Dallas McCarver. Justin recommended to Dallas that he work with me. And that really kind of was the start of my career as it's now known. So Dallas was my first Olympian in 2015. In 2016, I brought 5 people to the Olympia. And then every year after that, I've had people in the Olympia. 2020, I won the 212 division with Shaun Clarida. That was an incredible experience for me in terms of just coaching. I've always wanted to win at the highest level as an athlete, as a coach. That's always been my goal. So being able to accomplish that goal with Shaun at the forefront was something I will always forever cherish. I think also in terms of the mental aspect of coaching for me and just overall pressure that I put on myself, like accomplishing that has really relieved that for me. And obviously I'm not one to settle. Shaun and I want to win again this year, but I just, the way that I view my career now is completely different, in terms of what I've accomplished and what I will accomplish from here. That was kind of the cornerstone benchmark of what I always wanted to do. So that's kind of a snapshot of just kind of the higher successes. Obviously on a day-to-day basis, I just still live a very simple life. I coach people all day long, every day. This is what I love to do. This is what I'm passionate about. I love seeing success stories within individuals. And that ultimately is why I got into coaching, because I felt like from a very, very early age, I mentally had what it took. And I felt like I could convey that to other people. And athletically, I was very athletic, but I wasn't at like the top tier of athleticism. And I really realized that my goal was to be a professional soccer player, football player for you guys overseas. And I was very good at the high school level, very good. I was, one of the best in my state, but then going to college, I just realized that I was lacking, the skill set to really go on to the next level. So that's when I started to shift my focus into more of a coaching mindset. And then that's when I really developed into bodybuilding, because for me, bodybuilding, I loved it because I either failed, my fail or success rate was based off of myself, and I wasn't dependent on anybody else. And that's why I really enjoyed getting into it.
How does that feel when not only your client, because Shaun isn't only your client, when I watched the interview he made to Gasp, I think he clearly said that you are a part of his family, to be honest. How does that feel when your friend wins Mr. Olympia? Of course, with you helping him, but what emotion does it bring to you?
Well, so honestly, for those of you guys that didn't watch that story that Shaun spoke about on the Gasp interview, I would watch it. It kind of all took us by surprise. Like, we woke up in the morning. This was Sunday morning after he won on Friday night. The Gasp crew showed up and they just wanted to do like a really transparent interview with us. Obviously I was crying. He was crying. So the morning that Dallas passed away, Shaun called me and he said, I want you to know that I'm going to be your first Olympian now. And the reason why he said now is because I think we all believed within my team that Dallas was going to win the Olympia. And that's something that I've held very dear to my heart, that Shaun made that commitment to me. So seeing it accomplished with him through the history that we've had, and the fact that we've been working together now 6 years, it's very, very special. And honestly, in terms of that family bond, I think that's what it takes to win at the highest level. I think you can win, I think winning your pro card, that can happen with multiple coaches. It can happen without coaching. But to really win at the highest level, you have to have a really unique bond with the person, and you have to trust them. You have to have each other's best interests in mind. And that's what Shaun and I have, you know. So when it came to, you know, even that week at the Olympia, when we had both had more pressure on us, maybe internally because of the expectations that we had as a team, it was an incredible week. And somebody actually asked me this week who my favorite pro to work with is. And I would never put one pro over another. But what I will say is that with the pressure that Shaun and I had on us, it was the best Olympia week I've ever had. And that's not because of the win. That's because of how Shaun treats me and how things are within his home. And what I mean by that is a week of the Olympia, like, it's not like walking on eggshells around him. Obviously, yes, he's tired. Obviously, yes, he's drained, you know, but he still is caring. He still is communicative. He still is conversational, you know, still cracks jokes. And it was just a very, very pleasurable experience to me. And I always want to give him credit for that, because I'll never forget the way this past Olympia went. And obviously it's going to be cemented in my mind because of the victory, but more so than that, who Shaun is as a person. It was just so good for me to see him finally get, to some extent, the credit that I think he's deserved for a long time, because the difference with Shaun is that even now as the Olympia champion, we're always going to be fighting an uphill battle, always. Because he's never going to max out the class. So you're always going to be competing against guys that literally are maxing out the class. So we have to be that much better. You know, but it was really, really great for me, especially to see on Saturday night, now that he had the title and walked back into the finals of the Olympia, how he was treated, how he was received. It was great to see.
Recent times has shown you that men do cry, huh? Because
Yeah.
you have become a father, the Dallas situation, Shaun becoming a Mr. Olympia, and lots of other stuff. Then you can say that men do cry, and when they
For
do,
sure.
it's really
Yeah.
gonna.
Yeah.
When it comes to Shaun Clarida, he's, as you said, he's not going to max out his limit because he's like 40 pounds to still reach the highest point. How can he improve in case of not ruining his lines? Because he has the beautiful line now, you know, the waistline, and being so, he's even being compared to a smaller version to a Ronnie Coleman. So how can he improve to earn his status?
Well, so I don't really see him blurring his lines, because we're not doing anything in our camp to blur those lines. And you know, I also, like, I feed him respectively to his size, so we're not force feeding to the point that he's miserable. And again, we've had 5-6 years of off seasons now where we just continue to take the notes from the previous off season and apply them, and take the notes and apply them. I think in terms of where he can continue to improve would be in his upper chest. His shoulders and his delts are very, very strong. His arms are very strong. We can still get more width in the back. We can still get more width in the lower lats. Midsection can continue to improve. And what I mean by that is through his shape. As his lats continue to get bigger, as his quad sweep continues to improve, the midsection just staying the same. You know, I'll talk about like the negative things too. So Shaun has a little bit of a scar in his midsection. You know, and I saw some negativity around how can Mr. Olympia's midsection look like that? Like, guys, that was from when he was a child. You know, that's nothing bodybuilding related at all. So the other thing I think that we want to continue to work on is his hamstring development from the back, and then also his adductors within the back shots. Those are two things that we want to continue to improve. But I mean, we really have the system down. It's pretty foolproof at this point. He continues to add 5 to 7 pounds a year the past few years. And then at this point, honestly, I know how to peak him so well, and I'm so confident in that. And Shaun is where Shaun truly genetically excels is his ability to continue to deplete throughout the final week and just continue to sharpen up. So as we remove variables that are causing water retention, he's somebody that, like, the drier he gets, the fuller he looks. And it's not always food dependent. So when it comes to carb loading him, I don't have to push him to the extreme to have that pop. You know, I mean, he looked insane at finals in terms of the pop that he had, but in relation to other people, he's not having to eat nearly as much food to then blur the midsection, to blur the lines in order to get that amount of fullness.
I think that the biggest problem when it comes to the Mr. Olympia was nowadays the shows at all, the pro shows or amateurs, was the midsection, as you say. the blur in it, and amount of food that people think that they have to force in case to be so to speak full. But we have two examples. We have Shaun, who, as you said, doesn't have to force the food so much and still is round, and Big Ramy, he doesn't have to force the food as well. Do you think that they both can hold the titles for really, really long time because of that?
Well, I know that, and I can't speak necessarily on Ramy because I don't know exactly what he's doing. That being said, I was extremely impressed with the way that Ramy looked this year. I was thrilled for him, and I was thrilled for Chad that they nailed the conditioning, because I know that was a stressful thing. You know, like even at the Arnold, he was off, and kind of his MO has been that, you know, if he can only bring the conditioning, he'll be unbeatable. Well, he did it, and he was unbeatable. You know, in terms of Shaun, I mean, Shaun's goal right now is to win 10 Olympias. That's where Shaun's head's at. You know, so that's what we're going to try to achieve. We're not going to get ahead of ourselves. You know, we're still approaching this as if we don't have the title. You know, that's how he's training. That's how I'm coaching him. And we're just going to continue to repeat this process year in and year out, you know, Lord willing, as long as we're, you know, able to go and go from there. But I do think that Shaun, now that the eyes are on him, I think he's going to be very hard to beat.
Yeah, being honest, yes. If Derek doesn't stay in 212 and they fix him, because Derek is the Lansford. He's a really interesting competitor, but I think that weight class holds him back now.
Well, I think Derek as a bodybuilder is incredible. I personally don't understand the desire or need or want to stay in the 212, because I feel like he's always continuing to sacrifice his best look. And I honestly don't even think it's coach dependent. Obviously, with Hani in his corner, I think his ability to nail the mark is going to be improved. But with that being said, I still think they're going to, like, he's so big, round, bubbly. I've seen him look crazy at 230. He just is always going to be sacrificing to get to that 212 mark. And it seems like it really hits his legs hard. You know, his legs seem to always come in more narrow. You know, I honestly, I believe in my heart of hearts that right now, Derek Lunsford is a top 5 in the world guy in the open, if he comes in at his best in the open. And I feel like that best look is going to continue to be sacrificed in the 212.
Let's hope then that they change their mind, because before we move to the main subject, which we already have started, how big is your Jordan's correction right now?
Just something else too, really quick. Me saying that about Derek, I hope people take that, and I hope if he hears this, he takes that as a compliment, and not that I'm worried about him in the 212, because that's not at all what I'm saying. I just again, I'm a huge fan of bodybuilding, and I'm passionate about it. And, you know, even from an outsider's perspective, seeing his images, it wasn't so much this year because he didn't post. But last year, I think it was last year, he posted some images about 3 weeks out at MI40 and looked insane. So insane that I thought he was going to do, or maybe it was 5 weeks out, whatever it was. I thought he was going to do the open and just mess around in the open at the Tampa Pro, because he looked that crazy. And then it's just that it just doesn't translate to the stage. And what happens in that 3 weeks out mark to the stage, and what you see in the pictures is the narrowing of the thighs, the narrowing of the chest, the fullness in the chest drops down, the arms look more slender. And, you know, all those benefits that he has, all those structural gifts that he has, they just kind of fade away. Now, as far as Jordans, what are you asking me?
The collection, how big is it right now?
I honestly don't know how many pairs that I have. I would say probably upwards of 150.
Are you going to collect them just like to keep them and sell them in the future?
No, I honestly, I don't have any desire to sell them. So Jordans for me, this is Jordans for me in a nutshell. I grew up around a lot of athletic kids, and my family, we couldn't afford them. You know, so my buddies, my friends at the time, you know, the basketball teams that I played on, like everybody else had them. And not only that, I was such a huge fan of basketball and Jordan. And I saw, you know, the every year him come out with these shoes. My neighbor at the time, 96, 97, 98, he had his parents were separated. So he would go spend 2 weeks with his dad every summer, and every summer he'd come home with the new pair of 11s, a new pair of 12s, a new pair of 13s. And like, so now that I'm older, like I'm kind of just like reliving that part of just my childhood that, not that I didn't get to experience, but that we just couldn't simply afford at the time, you know? So that is part of my love for shoes. I've always loved shoes. And now, you know, and not that I'm going to force it on my boys, but I just want to kind of give my shoes to my boys. And so, you know, even some of my Kobe collection that I have once he passed away, I just kind of put those shoes on ice and they're in my son's closet for him, you know, and he can do whatever he wants with them.
Yeah, going to the main subject, you know, there are people who are saying that you don't need a coach, that coaches are useless nowadays, that every athlete can coach himself, which to an extent is quite right. But as you said, every top athlete had their coach. Ronnie Coleman, Shaun, Flex Lewis, every each of them had their coach. But at the first, what makes an athlete being a coachable one?
I think their willingness to learn and adapt is what I would really say is somebody that's coachable, somebody that comes in, shows up ready to work. And obviously in the current climate of coaching, showing up ready to work might mean being receptive via email, being able to convey what's communicated via Skype, WhatsApp, email, and turning that into proper execution in the gym. You know, and to answer this question, I think it's a little negligent, or not negligent, just like naive. Like ultimately, even the best in the world are still being coached. Tom Brady still has a coach. Tom Brady has a bodywork specialist, because he's still trying to seek ways to improve outside of where he's at currently. You know, and I had a conversation with a high-end national guy yesterday, and I you know, posed to him a very simple question, and I named off 3 main lifts. And I said, in the last 2 years, how much have you progressed on these 3 lifts? And, you know, I think that might have been the first time that he had actually ever really even thought about it. And his answer was, well, not really, you know? So like, I think a good coach should just make you aware of your environment. And if that environment is one that's stagnant, or if that environment is one that's progressing. And yes, in terms of, you know, you can keep yourself accountable, but the thing that I always say is you can't do what you've not been taught, whether that's exercise selection, whether that's loading parameters, whether that's proper execution within intensity and output within cardio, within training. If you've never been taught that, you can't expect yourself to get to that level without some type of guidance to get there. You know, I had somebody else email me last week and say, you know, I'm new to this. I feel like I've done pretty well on my own. At what point do you think I need a coach? And my answer to him was, at the point that you feel like you want to maximize your development as timely as possible. You know, because you can mull around for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years, do all the things wrong, learn from doing things wrong. But if you want to fast track that, you know, learn from somebody that's already done it wrong, learn from somebody that has a lot of experience. And then from there, you're getting, you know, and from point A to point B as effectively and efficiently as possible, rather than taking all these side steps, these detours, these mistakes, because somebody's already been there. Or somebody has the wherewithal to realize, you know, based off of your biofeedback, things that you might not ever even know or be aware of as to why you're not progressing, or why you're not sleeping well at night, or why the sleep is hindering your recovery. And then, you know, you're not able to progress in the gym, or all those things. Like we shouldn't, you know, as an 18-year-old kid, 19-year-old kid that has a huge genetic ceiling, or, you know, potential when it comes to bodybuilding, you can't expect that person to know all that.
Yeah. So it's more like being capable of taking the advices from people who have already either been there or themselves, or seeing the mistakes made by others and fixing them.
Right.
Yeah. And do you think that people with worse genetics than the top ones are more coachable?
No, I wouldn't say that. I really wouldn't. I would say that this is what I notice is hard. People that have been in the industry for a long time, they're a little bit harder to coach because the methods that they used in the past that might be different than the methods that I'm using now, or they're simply just stuck in their ways because they've been doing it for so long. For example, you know, let's talk about genetics for a second. Brett Wilkin, I just talked to him within his last update because genetics is a very tricky thing. I would say at this point in Brett Wilkin's bodybuilding career, he has some of the best genetics within the IFBB right now. I would say probably top 5 to top 10 in the whole thing in terms of genetics. I'm not saying he's a top 5 bodybuilder right now. I'm saying his genetic potential. But had Brett not have the work ethic that he does, we would never see the genetic potential out of him that we're now seeing. You know, 4 years ago, I think Brett was 170 pounds. So you're looking, and I might be a little bit off, but not much. So you're looking at a guy 170 pounds 4 years ago, and you're going to write him off like, no, his potential to gain muscle isn't nearly as exponentially great as what we're seeing today. But Brett would have never gotten here without the work ethic. And I think that's where so many people get genetics skewed. I think real genetics is realized through extreme effort and work ethic. Now, granted, you're going to have your outliers. You know, for example, I think Phil Heath posted like a Transformation Tuesday picture just a couple weeks ago, and you could see within his basketball uniform the potential that was there. Okay, you're going to have the Phil Heath, and by no means am I saying that Phil Heath doesn't work hard, but what I'm saying is, like, sometimes, yeah, the genetics are just going to be staring you in the face. Other times, like Brett Wilkin, it's not staring you in the face, but now we see the work that's being put in, and he is as regimented as it comes. He works extremely hard. He trains extremely hard. Now in 2021, you're looking at a guy that's 280 pounds and structurally is incredible, you know? So, but that would have never been there had the work not gone into that process. Another example of genetics and not really knowing your genetic card, I like to use Michaela Aycock, which is a girl that I worked with for a long time. You know, her starting pictures genetically, it looked like she had no genetics. You know, in terms of just her shape was bad. You know, she was straight up and down, but yet through consistency, through extreme effort and time, she made herself one of the best in the world. You know, but she could have easily been written off early on as somebody, oh, poor genetics. She's never going to make it, never going to turn pro, never going to be a good pro, never going to be an Olympian. And she just squashed all those never going to be's. You know, Shaun's another example of that. If I had posted pictures of Shaun 4 years ago and said, this guy's going to be a Mr. Olympia in 4 years, everybody would have laughed at me, you know?
I think that a good example is as well Nick Walker. How many people have already scratched him all out? They already said, right, after so many Americans and attempts of, you know, not making it to a pro card, that he's not going to make it, he's not going to be and suddenly he's one of the top contenders when it comes to the pro show.
Right.
Yeah, and when it comes to, I have to just kind of bring it up. When it comes to this upcoming pro show that Nix is competing versus Blessing and Justin and Hassan Mustafa, I think, as well. Yeah. And perhaps Sergio might jump in as well.
I'm not sure about that. I think Sergio might honestly be doing Chicago, but I'm not sure. I haven't spoken to him.
But out of these four, I think it is more going to be a battle between Justin and Nick than Blessing. With all of the respect to Blessing, but he's a young competitor. We haven't seen him on a stage since like 3 years. We don't know what to expect of him. So I think that those three individuals come first in the line.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, this is a conversation that Nick and I have had behind closed doors. Like, Nick still has to earn the right for the look, you know, because I think that there's this period that these young guys have to earn their way. And it's not politics, it's not this, it's not the other thing. But like, for example, last year in Atlanta, you have three guys. You have Justin that's competed a ton. You have Max Charles that's competed a ton. You have Akeem that's competed a ton. So like, you're going to be more naturally drawn to them as a judge because you've seen them before, you've judged them before, you know what to look for, you know. And with Nick, I mean, his rise up was pretty quick, but he still has to earn that right to be compared to that top group, and that's going to come through every time he steps on stage. showing markable change. And then not only showing markable change, but after he competes, speaking to the judges about what they want to see different and then making those changes. Like, for example, you guys are going to see a different front double from Nick this year than what you saw last year, because that's a direct response to judges' critique. You know, so like we have to know what to fix from getting in front of the judges to then be pleasing for them in order to get the look.
Yeah, and he was even told by some people that he needs longer off season. I don't think that it's a case, because he has all the mass that's needed. He just has to improve little things, like, for example, as you said, the front double, when he stretches more and his waist look way tinier there, and because of his huge arms and huge legs.
Right, right.
That's why I think that is a good idea to compete as soon as possible. And being so long on the diet, do you think that it impacted positively his waistline?
Well, so the main change that we made in Nick's diet is that we're keeping his protein traditionally low of what I like to use with most of my guys. And then we've just literally ruled out any foods that do not sit well with him. We don't use them. We don't implement them. And those have been the two biggest factors. He doesn't use fish. He doesn't use egg whites. He doesn't use fibrous carb sources, really, outside of like Killer Dave's bread, even though he's not using that right now. And then we've kept the protein at 200 grams cooked per meal. Like, you know, typically I would say if I didn't know that feedback from him, he would typically probably be on 280 grams a meal. So he's using 80 grams less per meal times 6. That's 460 grams less weight cooked of protein a day. That's a significant amount.
Yeah, that's lots of protein. And so you are making sure that his digestion is on top.
Yes. Yeah. And I do that with all my guys. I'm very, very key on digestion and not simply using a quote unquote bodybuilding related food just because it might be nutrient dense or healthy, you know, like sweet potatoes. I don't use a lot of sweet potatoes because I've seen allergies be present over time. I don't use egg whites because I've seen allergies be present over time. I'm not a fan of broccoli, you know, things like that. But again, that's a healthy food. But when you consume it day in and day out at the you know, the amounts that these guys are, you know, it can cause issues over time.
So basically you are preventing, because you said that you are not using the egg whites. So you're making the prevention because you know that in the future it might occur.
Right. And it previously did occur with him.
Yeah. So when it comes to the training, did you implement anything that made him or an athlete like Shaun keep their waist tight? For example, like training with the belt, or training supported to the bench, or doing planks or something like this?
So when we're talking about guys like Shaun and Nick, I very cautiously try to not take credit because these guys are so driven. Brett Wilkin, again, like these guys are so driven on their own. I don't have to tell these guys to train their core. You know, like training their core is a result of them wanting to be the best in the world. And it's a byproduct of, okay, we need to get here. And how I'm going to get here is by doing everything in my power. You know, now granted, with Nick, you know, I'm pretty strict on his posing. I'm pretty strict on, for example, Nick doesn't like to hit his front lat spread, but I make him hit it, and I make him send me, you know, every time he sends me pictures, if there's not a front lat spread in there, I say, you know, where's the front lat spread? You know, but I don't have to micromanage these guys. I just don't. And I want to say that because I think at times I don't ever want to come across like I'm doing things for them that's really, they're so driven that I'm just sitting in the co-pilot seat and I'm helping them oftentimes more so mentally than anything, you know, just making sure that their head's on straight, making sure that they're paying attention to the recovery. You know, with Shaun, it's more so an issue of, you know, not just driving him into the ground 24/7 and, you know, just communicating and building that communicative relationship. So that way I know, you know, based off of their feedback, what to do, what not to do. You know, but Nick trains his abs, you know, after cardio every day. Like, I don't have to be like, hey man, you need to train your abs. Like, he wants to be the best in the world. Like, I don't have to do that.
So at morning, yeah?
Excuse me?
At morning, yeah, the cardio, post-morning cardio.
Yep.
Yeah, one more thing considering diet, the zero sources, zero sauces, zero Coke, and so on. Do you implement it in the diet, or just?
No, he like Nick doesn't use that stuff. Shaun doesn't use that stuff. Now, in terms of like my general clientele, what I typically like to do is I like to pull it out the last few weeks. You know, even for myself, like I would allow myself to have Diet Coke up through 8 weeks out. And then at 8 weeks out, I would cut it. Now, there's nothing magical about cutting Diet Coke at 8 weeks out, but it's more so like I like to mentally train my mind to not have to feel like it needs things, and not to, what's the word I'm looking for? Not create an environment where I need to reward my mind with a diet soda or something like that, just like to kind of be mentally tough. And that's part of the enjoyment of a contest prep for me. But again, like you know, for this is another great example. Justin Compton, when he won the Kentucky Muscle, which was one of his last qualifying shows before he turned pro, at the state level, I believe he told me that he drank 2 liters of Diet Coke every day his entire prep. You know, and the only reason why I'm saying that is because like some of these things matter. If you have somewhat of a sensitivity to artificial sweetener, then obviously it matters. If you don't have that sensitivity, then Justin's a great example that you can get in crazy shape and still, you know, do those things. It's more so like, you know, where you're at mentally with them, you know, how strict you're wanting to be just for the sake of being strict, things like that.
Being a coach for so long, you work both with amateurs, with the people that are beginning their journey with bodybuilding, and a pros. What are the biggest mistakes that beginners make?
I would say that the biggest mistakes that beginners make comes down to not allowing themselves enough time to learn proper execution, training too much, and then training repetitively with poor form. And then also just having too many opinions. I think they're getting way too many opinions. And this isn't to me or any other coach, but like if you have a coach and you trust that person, then when you're in the gym, like don't be asking anybody anything, because whether it's sound advice or not, it's going to be distorting your view of the advice that you should be getting from your coach. You know, so I would say that that's a lot of the misconception, because ultimately, like I'm a huge believer that to drive progress, you need to drive proper execution in the gym. And then once the proper execution's in place, you need to be driving effort in the gym. And I think oftentimes this whole process is rushed just to then be able to show on Instagram how much weight you can lift, but the form is not proper, or you have 12 bands at the top of the hack squat and you know, you're getting no loading in the stretch position because you got 12 bands at the top of the hack squat, but it looks cool on Instagram. You know, so I could go on a talk just about, you know, reverse banding movements, and there's a place for them. Yes. If you have poor knees, that's something that's great to do. But at the same time, if you have poor knees while you're doing the reverse banded hack squat, you should also be addressing the root issue of the knee and not just continue to reverse band your hack squat through eternity. You know, like even with myself at one point, I reverse banded hack squats while I was working through a hip issue that was causing a downhill reaction in my knee. Once I resolved the hip issue, I pulled the reverse band off. You know, whereas, you know, I see people reverse banding and never taking the reverse bands off, but yet they're not addressing the root issue of why they need the reverse band in the first place.
You are putting a lot
of whole subtopic. You didn't even ask me about that, but I just felt like throwing it in there.
But putting lots of pressure on the execution of the training. How being an online coach, because you don't coach people one-on-one, yeah? How?
Yes and no.
Yeah, not often. So
right.
How do you manage to change their execution? Do they send you videos? How are you?
Yeah, so within my check-in process, I ask for 2 to 3 videos per week. And what I ask them to do is I ask them to send me the movements that they have the least amount of confidence in, the ones that require the most amount of risk, or the ones that there is the most amount of error to occur in. You know, so like more so the compound lifts, or how they're executing a hack squat, or their rowing mechanics, things of that nature. You know, something that I fix all the time is people putting their feet up too high on a leg press or a hack squat. And they're not getting any increase really in knee flexion. And that's the whole purpose. And, you know, just going through that process with them and assessing these things, seeing what needs to be fixed. I love that part of the job, because again, like, I think it's on me to drive progress. And if I'm not paying attention to how my athlete is training, how really am I able to help facilitate the process of driving progress for them?
So do you think that the training is the most important aspect in bodybuilding?
For sure.
Because every each of us has some kind of diet, every each of us uses some kind of supplements, so to speak. And
Right.
there is nothing much that can change. You know, there are always some kind of exotic compounds or something like this, which most of the time don't work on, they don't make anything significantly better than the ones we have used since the beginning, to be honest.
Right. Yeah, I'm a firm believer that the training is the main driver of progress.
So are there any exercises that you would call as the must do?
No, I don't like using blanket statements like that, because there's many ways to get the job done. What I will say though is I think that hip hinge movements are very important, via like an RDL for complete hamstring growth. And then also getting in the hip hinge position and rowing out of that position to make your erectors, the muscles around your spine, really support yourself. I think that shows a great difference in density within back development. Now, you know, for quads, I've seen people get massive quads on the leg press. I've seen people get massive quads on the hack squat. I personally, for quads, if I had to choose just one movement, I would just hack squat, because that to me is the one where I can get my body positioning the best to make sure that we're executing things properly.
What is your opinion on intensifiers, like a drop set, the cluster sets, and so on, and when to implement them?
So my opinion on this is that I think that you should be able to maximize a true set to failure first, and that should always be your bread and butter. And then if you're trying to drive volume up, intensifiers up, then you can add these things in. But like again, I've seen time and time again, I like to really make things simple and quantifiable. So within those two things being said, I want to make sure that you can track progress and you can know where you're heading. And obviously there's a time and place to do set intensifiers. And when you're training with your boys and you're getting together at the Arnold Classic, this, that, and the other thing, like throw those things in because it's fun. But I think honestly, for the greater amount of time, if you're just continuing to monitor your progress within set variables and then making sure that you're progressing those, it's a foolproof method, you know. And the other thing that I think people need to really be able to monitor is they're accumulating fatigue between one session to the next. And if you're doing a straight cut system of progressive overload, it's easier to navigate that. If 1 week you throw in a triple drop set or a cluster set and the next week you don't, that could really drive up that accumulating fatigue, but that's harder to monitor because it's not a consistent set variable.
When working with Nick Love or people like this, how you don't have to, I think you don't have to help them with the training, because Nick is such an intelligent one.
Nick does his own training, 100%. All the credit goes to him.
Yeah, he's even making the. I have seen loads of his videos where he trains, and he's such a smart man when it comes to and such a strong man, because he's like what 24.
Yeah, yeah, I think so.
Something like this, and his lifts are insane.
Yeah, I mean it's not even really explainable how strong he is. I mean, it literally is insane. Like, he is a true freak, absolute freak. I mean, there's no other way to describe it.
And how can we explain to the people what does it mean to train to failure? Because it's so misunderstood. What does a set to a failure mean?
So a set to failure means, for me, it first means being able to perform a set with proper execution. And then once that proper execution is in place, being able to take that set as far as you can without any breakdown in that execution.
So, for example,
not changing the form for the sake of getting more reps.
So that's a progressive overload, basically. If I want to keep progressive overload, I want to keep the form as stable as the week before.
Yeah, the form should always be a constant variable.
So it's always the same, not changing nothing.
Yeah.
And so, for example, going past the failure is every rep that anyone gives me any support with another rep. Yep.
Yeah. So, and that's something too. Like I'm totally cool with doing a forced rep. But I personally like to stop with one forced rep because then you actually know what you got on your own versus what you didn't. But then if you're going into 2, 3, 4, 5 forced reps, at what point are those forced reps basically diminishing your ability to have output against the rest of the workout? You know, so did that set where you did 5 forced reps, did that take away your intensity output by 30% over the rest of the workout? And if so, is that really worth it? You know, I mean, if you're having that much down regulation and energy output through the rest of the training session, did you kind of overshoot your load on that one set, but yet there's really not that much value to it?
Having so many athletes with a higher level and beginners and so on, do you think that you are going to come back to competing anyhow soon?
I honestly don't think so. I'm really at peace with, you know, where I'm at. And again, like I said at the beginning, like me accomplishing what Shaun accomplished on stage, that's going to surpass anything that I know I could do personally. And ultimately my goal, my driving force more than anything was to be a coach. And, you know, and I'm at a point now within my business and within my family life where it just doesn't hold as much value to me as it once did. You know, I just don't see the need. I want to be very, very present with my boys. I want to be a dad that's physically active with them. And I don't want to be a dad that misses out on things. And I just don't see the value that I once did. Now, granted, would I have loved to accomplish that goal? Yes. I had an injury. You know, I don't even know if you know this, but I've now had 2 surgeries on my pec.
Yeah.
So like I'm still in the rehab process. So basically from the time, I don't even know if I'll be back to full strength 1 year post-op, you know? So at some point, like, and the other thing that I want to say too, and I will never, ever, ever be one of those guys that leaves bodybuilding and bashes bodybuilding, because bodybuilding has created a great life for me. But since I've not been so focused on my own progress, so many other areas of my life have exponentially improved. You know, and that's something that you don't really see until you fully commit to being out of it. And I still, like, I love bodybuilding with everything inside my being, but I just don't have that desire to have to prove myself on a personal level with my own physique anymore, because ultimately in my mind, I've proven something on a greater level in terms of my ability to coach somebody at the highest level.
So you have found your niche, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, honestly, mentally, man, I'm in a great spot. You know, and I'm very happy. And I'm content, you know, and I'm very proud of what I've done on the coaching front.
I want to ask you a personal question, not so personal, about the business. When are you guys coming to, and could you speak shortly about what is the future of your company when it comes to supplements, and when are you coming to the Europe?
So we're working on getting into Europe right now. We had a conversation about that again yesterday. We are in the UK, but I understand now that you guys, that doesn't matter.
No,
you know?
we can still get things from UK, you know.
Okay. So then we are in the UK. And then on a business front, you know, our goal is just to continue to create a brand from the Revive end, that's focused on, more so than anything, just creating awareness within health markers, and then showing how our products can help improve health markers in every stage of life. You know, obviously we initially entered into the bodybuilding space because that was a way that I could use my reach. You know, but we're wanting to continue to transition into other athletic platforms, whether that be CrossFit. We're actually working very closely with a new company in Florida that works with combine athletes. So those guys that are transitioning to the NFL and to Major League Baseball. So that's the kind of the next pathway that we're going. And ultimately just creating awareness about the importance of health, creating the education standpoint for people to understand how simple nutraceuticals, vitamins, herbs impact their health. And, you know, again, just creating a bigger platform where we can create awareness about those things.
Yeah, and I have listened to one of your podcasts with No Switch Fitness, and where you said that in the future you wish to have just few athletes which you are going to coach for free, and my business is going to be a supplement industry.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, that's, I want to, again, coaching has been great. But ultimately, coaching is very, very demanding. And the expectations that I place upon myself as a coach are very demanding, so it's hard to be a quote unquote family man within the realm of coaching, because I'm always communicating with my athletes, and ultimately when my boys are 10 years old, I want to be able to take them away for a week and not have to be doing check-ins all week long. Or, when they're at a big game, I don't want to have to be on my phone the whole time. And I want to be able to watch them and then not feel pressure on the back end if I have all these people to get back to. So I'm actively working to get there. But in the meantime, my coaching process, this is what I do all day long. I get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. I start my check-ins at 6 o'clock in the morning. I also, I interlink my Revive and Raw work as it needs to be done. I'm in the office here at our HQ now, just working in whatever capacity I'm needed. And then at night, I go home, I play with my boys, I read books to them, I tuck them in, and then I work until I go to bed. That's my day.
Speaking about your boys, just a short question. What would you do if in the future, of course, they are still young, but they would come to you and say that we want to bodybuild?
I'll support them. There's no reason why I shouldn't support them in that.
Yeah.
I want them to be very athletically versed, and then I want them to be able to do whatever they want. That ultimately I want to see. Even my son, my oldest son, he's even at the age of 3, he's very different than I was at an early age. I was very ball centric. I cared about sports. That's all I cared about. Whereas he loves animals, he loves dinosaurs. He can name off more dinosaurs than I could ever dream of. But like the one thing that my wife and I have talked about is that we wanted to get both of our boys involved in gymnastics, just to create like a really strong athletic foundation and a flexible mobile foundation. And then the other thing that I want them to do is I want them to be on a organized swimming team. Swimming is something that I did very early on that I attribute a lot of my mental toughness to, because of how hard and demanding it was on me at an early age. It also instilled just responsibility within me, because I had to get up. I think it was like 6 o'clock or 5:30 in the morning and get myself ready. And then my friend came and picked me up. And that was kind of how I was introduced into swimming. So not only was it really hard, really structured, but it just created a lot of personal responsibility in myself. And I want my boys at an early age to learn those characteristics within a sport environment, and swimming did that for me. So other than that, I'm cool with them doing whatever. I want to create, even like, getting them on 4-wheelers and just having fun doing that, and just being boys. That's really what I want to do with them, is just allow them to be boys.
Knowing how busy person you are, I don't want to keep you much longer, but what do you think is the future for Matt Jansen yourself? Because we already spoken about the company, but do you have any goals and do you still accept the clients?
Yeah. I mean, every day I'm still working. My client load is as big as it's ever been. This is what I'm committed to doing every day, and there's no, in the short-term future, in the next 5 to 10 years, this is going to be my life. In terms of my goals for myself, I just really want to create, I think ultimately what we all want to create, and that's financial freedom. I want to one day be able to wake up and I want to work because I enjoy working. And I always want it to be about that and not work because I have to work. Just create a life for my family that's enjoyable, that creates a lot of memories, that creates a lot of traditions. And that's what my focus is on right now. It's not so much about my personal development. It's more so about setting up relationships and setting up systems in place. Like I want to be, in the next 2 to 3 years, I want to be completely debt free, like not owe anybody a bill for anything, house, anything, and those are the types of things that I want to set up for myself.
But you wouldn't call it a sacrifice, because lots of people call it a sacrifice. For example, being a bodybuilder demands so much sacrifices. I don't think it does.
No, I'm not saying I'm sacrificing at all. This is what I want to do.
Exactly. When people want to contact you when it comes to coaching, do they have to do it via page, or because you have your...
So I have my coaching page is thecampjansen.com. My email is Matt, M-A-T-T, at camp-Jansen, JANSEN.com. And then MattJansen8 is my email. And that's always another easy way to reach out to me.
So if anyone wants to contact you, I'm going to link it all below. Thank you so much for your time, Matt. I hope that that people are going to enjoy. I know that people are going to enjoy, and I hope to speak to you soon again.
Of course. Absolutely. Anytime.
Thank you, man.
Of course.